chains that hold you down. Sometimes you do it alone. And now I'm searching for peace. Here is my life, holding on tight. Here is my life, please somehow let me find home. Here is my life, holding on tight. Here is my life.
Hi, everybody. This is Lost Arts Radio on the air for August 27th, 2017. Welcome back to school. We have some interesting information for you tonight and a great guest, Michelle Rowton, with us. She's been on Lost Arts Radio more than once before. And for those of you who are new or may not know her, she's got just a little bit of her background. She's got a Bachelor of Science in Nursing from Texas A&M at Corpus Christi, which is, now dealing with the middle of Hurricane Harvey, and talk more about that at another time. But she's got a Master of Science in Nursing in neonatal practitioner from the University of Texas at the medical branch, and more than 15 years of neonatal intensive care unit experience that includes transporting sick and premature infants by ambulance, helicopter, and airplane, and more than 1,500 hours in extra training in functional medicine. And she specializes in holistic care for children 2 and under and functional integrative medicine treatment for ages all the way from birth up to 18 years old. Diseases such as autism, vaccine injury that we're going to be discussing, pervasive development delays, which are in the category of autism, and eczema, ADHD, allergies, chronic ear infections, autoimmune diseases, other kinds of chronic diseases. And she's a founding board member of Nurses Against Mandatory Vaccines and has been the nurse ambassador for Physicians for Informed Consent, several of whom have been on our program as well. So this is an area that we wanted to get into now, particularly because this is the back-to-school season for kids, and that's been combined, thanks to our government working with the medical industry, with the necessity, varying state to state, to get injected with mixtures of various toxic substances that you're supposed to believe are going to prevent you from getting sick and make sure you're really healthy. But most doctors and medical personnel that are doing that, and now drugstore people and grocery stores where you can get these shots, almost none of them know what's in the shots, which is pretty astounding. So we're going to help you out with that and talk about ingredients and what they're all about and connected subjects. So welcome, Michelle, and thanks for being with us. I really appreciate your time. I know you're in the middle of a bunch of other stuff, and it was really kind of you to come on with us, so thank you.
You're welcome. I'm more than happy to be here.
So here's where I want to start. This is the very end of August, and kids are going back to school all over the country, and this applies to some degree in other countries, especially. We had Michelle Ford on recently, who had just come back from Italy in the protests about the new mandatory vaccines for kids over there. And France is planning to do a bunch of new mandatory vaccines for kids in 2018, which is coming right up. And so this is not just for U.S. listeners, but affects people all over the world, since the sights of the vaccine industry are definitely set on every country as much as possible. But we can focus mostly on the U.S. and then use that as an example for everywhere. So what I'd like to start with, if we can, is talk about, we're going to jump around quite a bit because there's probably 10 times as much that I want to cover that we'll have time for. But let's start with the idea of back to school vaccination and whatever you want to tell us about that, and then we'll start looking at the individual vaccines.
I think the biggest issue we have with back to school vaccines right now from the standpoint of those of us that know what's going on or know what the reality is in different states is that there are many states that have exemptions. There's only a couple where all you have is the medical exemption, but many have religious exemptions and many have conscientious exemptions, but the way that it's presented by the school is no shots, no school, which 90% of the time is completely untrue. And so in Texas, we kind of have a group that if we catch somebody putting that on their website, we'll contact them and say, this actually is inaccurate. You were also supposed to have the link for the conscientious exemption for parents to order and fill out instead. And so a lot of parents are just completely unaware that there's even a choice. Mm-hmm. So the kids that are hit the hardest are the kindergartners, because they're set up to get the DTaP, polio, MMR, and chickenpox vaccines all at once right before they go back to kindergarten.
Right. These are 5-year-olds, I guess, right?
5-year, 4 to 6 year booster. Okay. So they have to happen at least after 4 years, but usually, here they call it kindergarten roundup. And so when they get their paperwork, right, to go get their teacher and meet everything, and of course it's a very stressful time for parents that their kids are going to be going off to kindergarten. It's kind of a huge milestone in their life, and they really want everything to work out correctly, and then they say, oh, by the way, your child needs these 4 shots, and most people just run off and do them without thinking about what a huge toxic load that is, that it's 4 vaccines at once, and of course DTaP is for 3 different diseases. So you're really giving, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, polio, measles, mumps, rubella, and chickenpox. You're giving 8 diseases at once.
Wow.
And they run off and do them, and then everybody goes to school, and then, of course, all heck breaks loose, and everybody's catching everything under the sun, and there has to be a pretty high viral load happening in those classrooms in that school at that time because MMR and chickenpox are live viruses and they shed for up to 28 days after the kids have had them. So it's actually not a really good way to start your kindergartner off into public school or even private school for the first time in that kind of situation.
And those are federal recommendations, right, that the states just decide how they want to enforce them, but the list of shots is given, I assume, by the CDC.
Yes, correct.
Right. Okay. Now, I think there's a really huge psychological issue to look at here, and the reason that the vast majority of parents, at least up to now, who have been completely convinced that this is the most important health maintenance advance in science in the last 200 years, and that anybody who's against it is trying to do something terrible to kids. We have to look at how that's been sold, that vaccines are actually, if you did one thing for your health, you should get all your vaccines and make sure your kids do too. That's been an amazingly successful educational program, hasn't it? I mean, most people still believe that.
They really do. I think that as time goes on, there are more people becoming aware because as they add more shots to the schedule with more doses, and then you have more children who are having adverse events and poor outcomes, then you have more people. The more kids you have having adverse events, then you have more families and more friends who are going that know someone that had a problem. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's going to be the detriment of the program that they're not taking into account, is that if they keep pushing it to make their dollars, that they're going to make so many people sick that they're just going to expose more people to the truth that things aren't going well. And so I think people are waking up, but then people kind of get into this panic state of, oh my gosh, it's kindergarten roundup and I'm supposed to have this paperwork in so we can get the teacher and then we can go to this kindergarten roundup event and know who our teacher is going to be. And if they get caught up in the semantics and the details of all else that's going on, and so they just kind of fly down to the pediatrician's office or the health department or urgent care or whatever and get their shots just to go check,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not really thinking. And so that's important to me, that it's not a checklist. This is a major health decision and a major decision you're making for your child's health that should be based on facts about the diseases and what's in the shots and the potential outcomes from the shots, not this is just something I need to do to get them into school.
Right, and in order to prevent the kind of thinking that you're talking about, the top people in the vaccine industry that are looking at strategy, they must be mostly thinking in terms of using some kind of circular reasoning, like if there are more and more problems showing up, it means we didn't get enough vaccines done fast enough. And we've also gotten some people that are refusing them, which are destroying herd immunity, and that's why everybody's getting sick. Something like that. Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of that. I always you can always find the information. That's the joy of the internet, which really undoes some providers. They like to make fun of parents and their Google, what do they call them? Their Google degrees, which those comments really upset me, because I have parents in my office who are extremely educated, and you don't discount a mama with a bone, because she will stay up all night and know more about a specific subject than you do when she shows up to the office the next day if you're not careful.
Right.
So you can find all the information, but when you're looking at these disease outbreaks, most everyone that's catching them are vaccinated. I think whooping cough, we've had a lot of outbreaks, and over 90% end up being vaccinated. Mumps recently, over 90% end up being vaccinated. And so when you just look at the news or you're scrolling down Facebook or whatever you're doing and you see the hype, there's always more details in the background that need to be looked at and taken into account. I actually saw a document from, I think it was Canada CDC. It was a document that had been mailed to a friend of mine that they messaged to me this last week, and it literally said on there, did you know that most adults are not up to date on their vaccines? It's less than 10%, and it might be down to 1 to 3%. And if you're an adult and you haven't thought about this, here's the list of vaccines that you need.
Wow.
And we looked at it and went, okay, so you literally are mailing paraphernalia to people's houses in Canada, telling them that there's no such thing as herd immunity.
Okay, explain what you mean by that.
Well, because the theory of herd immunity is that if you have over a certain percent of the population vaccinated for that disease, then it squelches out that disease, and then the disease will go away. And that's why people say, but what about herd immunity? I have to get my kid vaccinated, because if everybody's not vaccinated, then we lose our herd immunity, and then that's when the diseases pop up. That's kind of some of that rhetoric that you were talking about, the very circular thinking, and here you have a government agency actually mailing out and saying less than 10% adults are actually up to date on their vaccines. They don't have immunity anymore. They all need their boosters.
That's why these terrible plagues are sweeping through the adult communities, right?
Right, but the way I looked at it was, you just mailed me something telling me that there is no herd immunity, that it's a myth. Herd immunity was based on the thought that vaccines gave lifetime immunity, just like getting the actual disease did. And they really thought that at the beginning when they started the vaccine program. And of course, we figured out that's not true. That's why kids have so many boosters, and that's why they're after the adults now. But the truth of the matter is that we have a very large population of 50-plus year olds in this country who do not have immunity to anything that they've been vaccinated for, and we do not have, quote, herd immunity, because we don't have all of these 90+% of the population walking around vaccinated.
Yeah. And herd immunity itself is a really interesting concept, isn't it? I mean, it sounds really natural, and you picture this herd of horses that just has herd immunity, and you have to, since people are, not part of nature, you have to do it with vaccines, but you get the same natural thing as with animals that run around, and they're not all dead, so it must work. But then nobody really thinks very deeply about it, because if one person is vaccinated out of the whole population and it works, they should never get sick.
That's right.
And
if vaccines work, then they should never get sick.
Yeah, no matter who else doesn't. And, in Disneyland and places that they point to, just to clarify, you said most of the kids who get these diseases end up being vaccinated. I think you're meaning that in the sense that they had already been vaccinated before they got the disease. So the vaccines weren't working for some reason.
Correct.
And it must be these evil parents and their kids who are ruining herd immunity. It's just,
right.
It's such bizarre non-logic.
I, for the life of me, I will never understand if you're getting your child vaccinated, do you believe the vaccines work? Well, hopefully the person's saying yes, or else why would they do it? Mm-hmm. So if the vaccines work, then why does it matter that the kid standing next to you hasn't been vaccinated? So if my child who has not been vaccinated is standing next to yours who's vaccinated, and she's standing there and she's completely healthy, how can my kid give your kid the measles?
Right.
I will never understand that.
Yeah, exactly. I think lately there's sometimes, you've probably heard this saying, well, the reason 100% of everybody has to have every vaccine is that if you have somebody getting chemotherapy that's going to cure cancer by destroying their immune system, and they are going to pick up any disease that's around, if there's one person that is not vaccinated, they're going to have every disease there is, and so they will get the chemotherapy person sick and they'll die. I'm sure you've heard that.
Yep, I have heard that, and it's interesting that you say that, because part of the argument that goes on in the public school situation is, but what about that one kid? What about the kindergartner starting that's being treated for cancer right now, which is a whole other issue that we could talk about why suddenly all these children have cancer.
Yeah, it's a new development, right.
But I'm sorry, if you have a child that's immunocompromised or has some sort of immunodeficiency situation, or recently had a bone marrow transplant or chemo or any of those other things that really compromise immunity, the last thing you want that child to do is walk through that door on the first day of kindergarten and sit in the middle of the room of an entire room full of kids who were just vaccinated with MMR and chickenpox, because it's a live virus vaccine that sheds, and it's written in the literature that it sheds. If you look in the CDC documents, they know it sheds. They say that, the big contraindications for getting MMR and chickenpox are all those things that I just listed, and so they shouldn't be around all those people that have been vaccinated either. In fact, if you have a child like that living in the home, say that's on chemotherapy, that family is counseled and they are told, hey, nobody in this immediate household can get a live virus vaccine, whether that's the MMR, the chickenpox, the rotavirus, or when they were doing the flu mist. They've stopped that now, which is a whole other subject.
Right.
Nobody in the immediate household can have that. And if the grandparents are coming over every day, they can't have it either, because this child is very susceptible to that, but they are completely allowed to walk through the door and sit down in kindergarten.
Yeah.
Makes no sense.
It's very strange. Even some of the people who are questioning vaccines are saying it's because of, well, the most popular thing that they're questioning is mercury, of course, and that's the whole focus of the World Mercury Project and people who are looking at that. And some of them are looking at aluminum. But almost nobody is really familiar with the history of vaccination, because in the beginning, I think the first one that's publicly known that was using it, although there were people doing similar things in earlier ages, was Jenner. And there wasn't any mercury or aluminum or anything like that in the vaccine. It was just what some of those people call the ideal clean vaccine, because it didn't have those kinds of adjuvants in it. But they didn't have very good results at that time either. Right?
No, they really didn't. I'm that person going, it's not just the mercury, it's not just the mercury, it's not just the mercury. I think everyone should watch the documentary Trace Amounts.
Mm-hmm.
Where they talk about how they've, quote, taken the mercury out, but there's still actually trace amounts there. You can Google online. All you have to Google is CDC PDF vaccine ingredients, and the actual PDF by the CDC of every vaccine there is with ingredients pops up. But then what other people don't realize is there's also an excipient list that's separate that you have to look for, that's not as easy to find, of all the things that can be in the vaccine, but if they're under a certain percentage, they don't have to list it on the PDF with all the vaccine ingredients.
Wow, that's
interesting. Yes, people will focus on mercury, but I have in front of me the ingredients for the MMR or even the MMRV, which is the measles, mumps, rubella, and vaccine, varicella, the chickenpox, all mixed together. Mm-hmm. And the first ingredient is chick embryo cell culture, and the second ingredient is human diploid lung fibroblasts.
Okay.
We have chickens and we have humans.
Hopefully we're going to have time to go through some of these individually, because people need to comprehend some of these things that at one time might have been called common sense. But if you take cells from a chicken and you rub it on your skin, probably nothing's going to happen to you at all. But if you inject that into your blood and your lymph system and all the interstitial fluid around the cells, that's a whole subject in itself, right?
Right. That's a total subject in itself. There's so much information that you should be taking in before you make a decision to inject things like that into your child.
Right. So what we really want to bring back, since most people are not going to have time or focus to memorize the list of ingredients in every vaccine, is there used to be something, I'm sure it's anti-science and superstitious and everything, but it was called common sense. And it was very valuable. I mean, I know some people don't believe it ever existed, but it really did. And you can just get a feel for it if you found your 5-year-old who's going to be the subject of these kindergarten vaccine roundups that is playing in the backyard with a friend, and they found some old needles or even a new needle in a package. And they're practicing sticking each other with the needle and putting various things through it into the blood. You probably would want to stop them, right? If your common sense is not totally dead. And you would be right to not let them do that. But if somebody is doing it to them who's got a degree in a white coat, then we're so far removed from common sense, we think that must be really not only okay, but it's going to keep them very healthy. And that's a strange state to have degenerated into. It's called science nowadays.
It's strange. You also think about if I took the same concoction and mixed it up in a liquid and gave it to my child orally, I would have my child taken away and I'd be thrown in jail.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Or if you took some of these ingredients like the mercury and snuck out in the middle of the night and were pouring them into the reservoir for the drinking water, you'd be a terrorist. You'd probably be in jail for 1,000 years or something like that.
That's correct.
But injecting it directly into the blood is fine, and in fact, it's going to be what keeps you really healthy. I mean, the idea that people actually fell for that is astounding.
I think it's probably the most successful, human brain engineering project of ever.
Yeah.
There's such mass hysteria that nobody's even looking at facts or thinking straight. I mean, I got into it with 2 neonatologists a few weeks ago who were just furious at me, and they literally could not give me any facts or any details. I mean, you're talking about two doctors whose entire education and career is on 2 and under.
Okay.
Which is when a majority of the vaccines are given. They literally had no information. All they could do was name call and label and bring up Jenny
this
McCarthy.
is such a strange...
That's all they could do. And I'm like, I told him, I go, this is literally the strangest conversation I have ever had.
Yeah.
I keep giving you information and giving you places like actual research articles to go, well, if you look here and if you look here, or here's like a giant list of articles I've read through, which has taken me probably over 1,800 hours of my life. You could start with part of this list, and all they can come back with is something like, well, if I spent over 1,800 hours reading Dr. Seuss, I mean, that wouldn't make me a Dr. Seuss
That's great. I haven't heard that.
I mean, literally, that's all they can. And I'm like, I don't even know how to have an intelligent provider-to-provider conversation with you right now, because you're not actually giving me any depth or facts to work with.
Actually, Dr. Seuss probably has more value than what they're wanting you to believe in. But
probably.
I think you've hit on a incredibly interesting psychology that is being capitalized on by the people orchestrating all of these things, which goes way beyond just vaccines. And I know the first time I heard you talking, which is what made me hope that you'd come on our program, was a great presentation, although short, on Alex Jones's show. And he's willing to talk about this stuff no matter what happens. I mean, he's just pretty much assuming that people will keep trying to kill him all the time because he's willing to tell the truth. And he has been having his reporters go out in the street in cities from Seattle to Austin and all kinds of places all around the country and elsewhere. And where they're, rioting, there are paid rioters who are sent out. They don't even know what they're rioting against. And they're getting $25 to $50 an hour. People don't know that. And they're calling everybody a Nazi and pepper spraying them and trying to hit them with chains and bike locks and things like that so that they'll prevent fascism. They're called Antifa, but there's other groups doing that too. And Alex's reporters go up to them and try to say, do you even know what a fascist is? Do you know what you're protesting against and all that? And they just start screaming and they can't really talk. And they will throw hot coffee on you or things. It sounds exactly like the doctors you were talking about, minus the bike locks.
Right, minus the physical part.
Right.
It is exactly like that. It is. So, and part of my thing was, if I'm going to be really honest with you, I'm going to tell you everything I learned about vaccines when I got my graduate degree.
Right.
Which my graduate degree is 2 and under. The only information that I got was coercive rhetoric on how to get the parents to sign a consent so you could give the shots.
Because everybody knows they're necessary.
Right. Literally, that is it. I mean, it was like effective, safe, here's the schedule, here's the coercive rhetoric you can use to get the parents to sign, and then you give them. Literally, that's it. So if you guys can tell me all of the education that you got in your school, neither of you are that much older than I am, that would be great. Well, I never even got a response because, of course, they didn't get any information either.
But they don't. They not only do they not realize what's wrong with that picture, they're ready to violently defend it.
Yes. Yes,
I think it may be true that vaccines are one of the most amazing advances by the medical industry in the last 200 years. It's just not exactly the way people think.
Right. It's not amazing because it's, quote, creating health or keeping people safe. It's amazing because it has been so engineered to be so accepted without any real information or data. But hysteria is about all that it's been good for.
Yeah, and it's contagious like diseases are, because the parents that are educated with that from the CDC and the doctors, and I guess people they take on the role of being the troops in that defense organization so that the theory can't be questioned because you're trying to kill children if you question it. It's just, I guess it's tied into our training to worship authority figures that you don't question.
It is, and I think for a long time, Western medicine has been a paternalistic model, kind of like parent to child.
Yes.
You came to me, you're complaining of this, I said it's this, I told you to do it, don't question me, it's not open for debate, go do it, period.
Well, and their first name is doctor, they must be right.
Right. And so part of what I've talked to some physicians about recently is I'm like, you guys better wake up, because the paternalistic model of medicine in this country is dying a quick, fiery death. And more people are turning around going, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. Wait a minute, why do you keep just saying I need more injections and more pills and to rub a cream on it? Why is nobody trying to make me better?
Yeah.
Why isn't anyone trying to figure out what's actually wrong with me and to fix it? And that's where healthcare is going, and it's actually the tide's turning a lot faster than these physicians realize. And I tell them, I go, you need to look around you and wake up, or you're going to be standing there with a whole hot mess of medical bills to pay for, and nobody is going to be coming to see you. Get with it. You have patients that know more than you do about actual health and healing the body and reversing disease.
Yeah, and doctors don't have a great record of health for themselves, unfortunately, right? And longevity and things like that. They
don't, and most people that are in the setting that I'm in or work with me or considered my colleagues, most of us have been through the Western medicine ringer at some point in our life, that we have something really wrong with us and nobody could help us. 9 doctors later, 11 doctors later, this treatment, nobody could help us. And we finally, most of us turned around and went, okay, I guess I'm going to try a chiropractor or a homeopathist or a naturopath, because literally I'm going to die because nobody can help me.
Right. Sounds very
cool. So that's the fact, is most of us have been through that, and that's why we turn that way. And so, of course, there's a lot of very unhealthy physicians out there who are ignoring that they have a health problem, and others that are just caught up in their own model. And then you have some that are doing pretty well, that it just really doesn't cross their mind that there's a problem. So it'll turn. And I think when it turns, vaccines are just automatically going to have to come with it, because it doesn't really fit the new model of medicine that's not paternalistic. And so I think there are going to be a lot of white men kicking and screaming as they're drug across the coals on this one over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and there are two categories. I think there's the category that you're talking about that just believes it no matter what, and they're going to have to kill you if you don't, just so that everybody is okay. And then there's a category above them of the designers who know, and they're not confused. They're doing it on purpose, and that's almost beyond the imagination, I think, of most people, that anyone could do this intentionally. But at the top levels, they know what vaccines do.
Yes.
Right.
At the top level, they know what vaccines do. They know statins are bad. They know GMOs are bad. They know. They just want their money. And I don't know that we'll ever get, it's not, when you're dealing with a mass of people, it's probably almost not a good thing for everybody to realize that at once, because all hell's going to break loose.
That's true. If they could just get some common sense back, that would be a good start.
Yeah, common sense would be a good start. I totally agree with you.
The semantics have been one of the main weapons in this whole war to get everybody to go along with the vaccination and fight for it. And you can see an example of that starting with the measles situation at Disneyland, because the way it's been explained, that I've seen anyway since then, is the idea of a preventable disease rather than whether it's something bad or not. It doesn't matter even if it doesn't hurt you in a society where they have sanitation and hygiene and things like that, and you just get to watch more cartoons and stay home for a few days. it's preventable. And putting the focus on that takes the, pro and con list completely out of your sight and says it's preventable. We have to prevent it. And the fact that it doesn't work to prevent it is another issue. But what do you see as this whole thing? If you agree with what I'm saying, this new focus on the incredible urgency to prevent all cases of measles, and that anybody who gets it is an outbreak.
I see it as a huge problem. Being in a private clinic right now, and I feel like this is a really good example. Is someone will bring their 10-month-old to me or their 18-month-old, and he has a cold. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about what you're going to do. Let's not give him sugar or fruit juice, and he's got mucus, so how about we not give him dairy, because that's not going to make it worse. That's going to make it worse until he's better. And we could give some vitamin C and some elderberry syrup and all of these things to support the immune system. And here's what the normal progression is going to look like. And yes, the cough is going to sound awful at the end because it loosens up and they have to get rid of all of it. And that's when you guys all bring me your kids, when in 3 days they're going to sound a whole lot better because they got all the junk out. And then, it could take 21 days for all of the mucus to completely go away. You don't need to bring me your kid for this. And I've literally, I'm nice. I'm like, let me teach you the process and the symptoms of what would consider to make it serious and the things you can do to support them. And then you'll have the information. And the next time you don't have to bring this child to me and pay a $20 copay for this. Mm-hmm. And they literally will say to me, I didn't know I could do that.
Right. Well, you're presenting the idea that the cold might actually be something good.
Right, but it's also just normal. And if you have an immune system that has to learn, it has to learn by experiencing the entire course of the disease. And part of what I teach is don't give your kid ibuprofen for a fever of 100.7. Mm-hmm. That's the immune system mobilizing. And every time you knock that fever back, you tell the immune system to shut up, and then it has to mount back up again to try to get everything going again to fight this disease, and then you tell it to shut up again, and then you're like, well, why is it taking my kid 3 weeks to get over this cold, and this kid was done in 5 days?
Yeah.
Because you keep interrupting. Stop interrupting.
Right.
But they literally don't know that that's okay because they watch TV and they watch the news and they get on WebMD, and they don't realize WebMD is run by Big Pharma, and that if they can teach you to say, what do I got, the next thing they can teach you is, what do I take for it?
In other words, everything in nature is preventable.
I'm like, just let it go. Just take a couple of days off of work until the fever is gone. Let the kid work it out. Eventually they'll stop getting sick. Mm-hmm. They won't get sick hardly at all because their immune system works and it knows what to do, and it built all these nice antibodies, and it got to run through the whole cycle uninterrupted. And these people don't realize that it's kind of all been orchestrated, that, well, it's a disease and we have to get rid of it immediately because my kid might die. And I'm like, it's a cold.
Naming diseases is a really powerful tactic.
Right, and then they'll come in, they'll go, well, don't you think you should swab for this or swab for that? And I go, well, I can if you want to pay for it, but when I come back, I will have the nurses tell you if it's positive or negative, but I'm not coming back in the room because my answer is the same. I don't care what it's called.
Yeah, exactly. And
they'll kind of go, oh, well, then, I didn't realize. I mean, it's still a virus. You just have the name of the virus. But that really makes people feel better for some reason until you kind of walk them through and go, the answer is not different at the end. So when you're talking about people saying, oh, but the illness is preventable, they're not thinking about how our bodies were made and how the immune system was meant to work, that we actually were meant to walk through every step of the disease. And it was not uncommon back in the day for people to say, oh, yeah, little Johnny got the measles and he started talking the next day, or he got the measles and when he was better, he just got up and started walking, that they kind of had these big milestones that they hit. Mm-hmm. And I've experienced the same thing in my house. My daughter got the chicken pox at 16 months, which is the exact same age I had the chicken pox. And I'm still breastfeeding her, so she had plenty of antibodies, and then it went rather smoothly. And, of course, I knew it was coming because I knew when she was exposed. And the most new words she ever learned and said with, like, concrete evidence that she got it because she did it multiple times in one day was the fever, the day she had the fever of the chicken pox, and she said 7 new words that day.
Wow. Wow,
that's a lot of work
really
for
interesting.
a 13-month-old. Yeah, it is. You know, and so when she's 22 months old and she told me the other night, Mommy, I want to ride the tractor too. How many 22-month-olds you know say 8-word sentences?
That's how old she is now?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Leave them alone.
Wow.
They you know, it's like, and, you know, I got a low-grade fever the day she got the fever, and I got a couple little pimple things on my stomach, and I went, yes, antibodies. No shingles for me. I'm good. You know?
But
the people, they want to interrupt everything when we all went, you know what? If you had the measles as a kid and you stayed home, watched cartoons and ate a bowl of ice cream, and Mom sat on the couch with you and cuddled and you itched a little bit or whatever it was that happened and you went back to school, you actually got lifetime immunity. And then when you got pregnant with your kid, that gave that fetus immunity from that disease. And then when you're breastfeeding for that first year, like you're really supposed to, if everything works out right and you can, you're giving them antibodies so that they don't catch it in that first year. And then after that first year, they start getting those things and they get their antibodies. And so there's even studies out there showing that children who have had the actual chicken pox or have had the actual measles have a lower incidence of very specific brain tumors later in life than the people that never had it.
It's almost like everything's connected.
Of course it's connected. Nothing's an accident.
Yeah.
Nothing, you know how we say coincidence? That's I always say that the thing that just absolutely undid me when I worked in the hospital setting was the word coincidence and the statement true, unrelated. Like, yes, I see that happen, and yes, I see this happen right after, but I'm just going to call it unrelated and move on with my life because it's too much for me to handle.
That's a slogan that you learned in school?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know that.
True, unrelated. Oh, yeah, in the hospital all the time. True, unrelated. Wow. You know, you're given a report. You're like, you know,
that's
this
a big
is what we did with this.
This is what teaches you that holistic thinking is wrong.
Yes. So I'm standing there with my eyeballs and my brain. I hope people think I'm pretty intelligent. And I'm going, well, this was the plan I made 2 days ago when I was here. And then this is what happened yesterday, and I was told all about it this morning. And so we did A, and then B happened. So we may need to rethink this plan. And the physician's like, true, unrelated. Next. Literally, I'm not even kidding. And you're like, am I in the twilight zone right now?
Yes, you are. And it's called higher education. And it doesn't mean that education's bad. It means they should stop the slogans and start actually doing it.
Yeah, they should. I have a really good example of this. I had a mom bring me her toddler who actually started with neuro and autistic symptoms at 9 months. Kid wasn't even vaccinated, had a clean diet. I mean, there was major stuff going on. Yeah. And she was taking her to another holistic office in the Metroplex, and she jumped offices because it really miffed her that physician wouldn't listen to her or get on board with her that the child got a really bad diaper yeast infection. And when she started putting an antifungal on the child's genitals, 75% of her symptoms went away. Her systemic neuro symptoms. Right. And he's like, no. I mean, I could just see him going, well, true, unrelated.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
And I'm going, wait a second, that's an antifungal. It's very vascular down there, so we have to have some sort of fungus or mold thing going on. Turns out she had all 3 of the most toxic molds just running rampant in her house.
Wow, so that was like in the walls or something like that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, their house is completely stripped down to the studs now. They don't live there anymore, and the more they rip down, the more they find. Wow. And now that they've moved her out of the house, she's better. And that came from her going, why isn't anyone listening to me that I put an antifungal on my child's genitals and her neurological symptoms are all but gone?
Yeah.
That has to mean something. And I'm like, you bet your butt it means something. That you have you have this other physician, true, unrelated. I could just see it running through his head.
Wow.
Right?
That's amazing.
So that is my thing about healthcare providers, is you have to start listening and you have to start paying attention, because you are missing all sorts of clues all the time.
Okay, now one of the things that they talk about with measles and why we have to prevent every possible case, and it just proves that, nature is inferior to medicine, is that a lot of people at one point, when conditions were different, were dying with measles and things like that. Can you explain to people what that really actually means?
Okay, restate that again.
Yeah, well, now measles is, an excuse to watch more cartoons mostly. But at one time, and conditions were different, people were dying with measles. And this is what a lot of the vaccinating doctors and teachers point to that and say, this is what happened because they didn't have enough vaccines.
I'm always the first one to say that I in no way discount that if there's a measles outbreak going on in a third world country, that there are days that up to 400 people are dying a day of measles. Right. I in no way discount that. I think it's terrible. It's a horrible thing. And living in this country, I feel like we should be able to stop that, but we are not stopping it with vaccination, because we've been doing vaccination campaigns in those countries for decades now, and it's not working. What we are not doing is, one, we are not providing them sewage and clean water and uncrowded living spaces, and they don't have nutrition. And so most of those kids are very malnourished, and they don't have enough vitamin A. Vitamin A is your key to dealing with measles. And so when everybody starts going crazy about the measles, I'm like, just order some vitamin A. You get a little bottle of liquid vitamin A. Just order it in. Look up the dose. You'll be fine. Yeah. No big deal. But that's not what's happening in this country. We've had, one person die in this country of measles in the last decade, and she
and if you look into it, it's
comorbidities.
She
had all sorts of problems.
There was something else that was responsible, right?
And I always say, I don't discount that. I don't discount that there are major problems going on in other countries, and I think it's absolutely terrible, but that's not where I live.
Right, exactly. And if somebody did want to do a campaign in other countries, instead of, so much money on extra bombs and stuff like that, we could not necessarily do it all for them, but show them what they need to do. Which is not the vaccinations.
Right. And that's what we always say about the vaccination programs, is still starving, but they got their shots.
Yeah, exactly.
The worst thing you can do is give a shot to someone that doesn't have good nutrition, because they don't have antioxidants and B vitamins and glutathione and all these things on board that you need to detox the aluminum and mercury and the cells of all the animals, and formaldehyde and polysorbate 80 and all of the junk that's in there. You don't inject somebody with that when they don't have detox agents on board. That's how you have poor outcomes afterwards.
Yeah.
We go to these other countries and these people are starving. They don't have clean water or a place to take a crap that doesn't make the whole village sick, but we hand out vaccines like they're candy.
Yeah. You could almost, if you didn't know better, think that people were trying to help radically reduce population, but that would be silly. But
that would be silly. Yes.
Before I forget, at some point, I wanted to go over, if you know more or less, since it's a national recommendation, what the list of recommended shots are for kids going into kindergarten.
So, if they're up to date, up to that point, up until kindergarten, it's going to be the DTaP, the polio, the MMR, and the chickenpox. Those are going to be the boosters. So you're getting boosters for eight vaccines, or 8 diseases. And then a lot of people get caught off guard around 11 and 12 years because around that age, they are required, I put in quotation marks, air quotation marks, required to get a DTaP and a meningococcal booster. So that becomes another situation where they go to get their kid registered for school, and they're like, well, school starts Monday, and they need a Tdap and a meningococcal before they can show up. And then, of course, a lot of people are adding in the HPV series on top of that, which can start, at first they said by 16, and then they backed it up to 12, and now they're saying as early as 9 years.
And they're trying to give it to boys now, too, right?
Yes, they are, which blows my mind because boys don't have a cervix of the most simple way to look at it. But that commercial that they have out right now about the, I didn't know. I mean, it's like a very guilt-driven.
Oh, yeah, your kid was
at
destroyed because you didn't get the vaccine.
Right, and my husband said he had a client come in who, I guess, like the parents and the grandparents were watching TV and that commercial came in, and man, they all fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. And so she's got 3 boys, one of them who's diagnosed Asperger's, and she is going to get them all the shots. And he's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Have you looked anything into this? I mean, it's one of the most dangerous vaccines out there. Many people have died. They've increased the aluminum and the Gardasil 9. Every quarter or every year when they're putting the reports out for the vaccine compensation program, Gardasil is the fastest growing compensated vaccine that there is right now.
Mm-hmm.
Have you looked at all of that? I mean, you realize the pharmaceutical company made that commercial to get this exact response out of you, and you literally have no details or facts in your brain about this at all.
No, it's just the emotional feeling of this tragedy that comes from no vaccine.
Right. That I could have done something.
Yeah, it's going to be your fault if you don't.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get you said there were 4 recommended for kindergarten, right? DTaP, polio, MMR, and one more.
Chickenpox. Chickenpox. Mm-hmm. So those are the boosters. They're giving all 4 of those at the same time, and they'll give that they don't make the MMR separately anymore. So you have to get the measles, mumps, and rubella together.
You mean they don't make those 3 ingredients separately, right?
They do. They actually make them separately, but then they smush them all together and put them in a vial as the MMR, and they don't allow you to purchase it separately anymore.
Okay.
But the chickenpox, what they've done is they've now made a vaccine that's measles, mumps, rubella, and it's got the chickenpox mixed into it. They call it the MMRV.
Okay.
And that one is particularly scary to me because it's double the risk of seizures to give the MMR together with the chickenpox. And what most people don't realize is I'll get pediatric publications on my desk at work because they send them to you free all the time, which part of my joy at work is making fun of them. But what parents don't understand is there is this article about the MMRV, and the title at the top said, MMRV just about as safe as MMR and varicella separately. So what the parents don't realize is that physicians, they just read titles, or they read the conclusion at the end. They don't actually read any of the information. And so when I actually read the article, it said right in the article that giving the MMR and chickenpox together doubled the risk of seizures in the most recent study. Now, the way I personally interpret that is that it actually is not just as safe to give those together. But because the author titled it like that, all of the pediatricians now walk around thinking that it's just as safe, and it's not.
Well, they said just about as safe, right?
Right. But they went, okay, great, check.
Yeah.
I'll just keep using the MMRV. And that's literally all the thought that goes into it.
Well, aren't they now saying also that the seizures for kids after shots are totally normal anyway? So having twice wouldn't really matter.
They're moving into that as well. And, most of the time they don't ask. I had a kid that I saw that started with seizures 4 days after he got the MMR.
Mm-hmm.
And he was at Dallas Children's Hospital for, 7 days, for the $1 million workup. Nobody ever asked him if he'd had any shots.
Right, because they're not related.
So we started looking at everything, and we're like, we're looking at it like, well, this is a kid, he's had eczema, that means he has a gut dysbiosis, and he's already showing sensitivities to foods, and he had chronic ear infections as a kid, a lot of antibiotics, he's got gut dysbiosis, he's kind of like that setup type kid, which most kids are now because they have these all chronic things that have been normalized.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But there had to have been a trigger, like something flipped him finally.
Right.
And so you ask the parents, well, did he have any shots like a week before or 2 weeks before? And they kind of get this deer in the headlight look and go, we went and got him the MMR 4 days before the first seizure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, now I have something to go on. So I get a huge nutrition test. He has no detox. All of his detox agents are gone. All of his B vitamins are gone. All his glutathione. I mean, he's a mess. And then we draw his titers for MMR, and he has rubella encephalitis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
His titers were like 3,000 times higher than they were supposed to be for rubella.
Wow.
So you get that taken care of, and he comes off the seizure medications. But he goes to the children's hospital. Nobody asks, and they say, well, you're going to have to be on seizure medications for a minimum of 2 years before we'll consider weaning you off.
Right, and if we can give you some more shots in that time, we might not have to do the weaning.
Right, and it's like, this just happens sometimes, and we don't know why. It's very common.
But we know it's unrelated. You were also saying that by the time they get to kindergarten, that's not their first injections. They're starting now at the first day they're born, right?
Yes.
So maybe we should look at... See, the reason I'd like to look at some of the earlier ones is that there are a lot of people having babies, getting ready to have babies, and dealing with hospitals, and they don't realize there's any danger connected to having a baby in the hospital. And even if they give instructions not to give vaccines to the baby, often it's done by mistake, intentionally, taking the baby away to weigh it or things like that. And what I'd like to start with on that issue is what are the shots that are given to babies, and then between then and 5 years old, if you know some of those.
So what they're starting with at birth is the hepatitis B vaccine, which just really undoes me because hepatitis B is largely a sexually transmitted disease, and needle sharing, like drug abuse disease, homeless, alcoholics, homosexual males.
Right.
That's your high risk group. And so what happens is in other countries is you'll have hepatitis B that's endemic, and if you have a baby that's born through a mother that has hepatitis B and they don't get that immunoglobulin and treatment and things like that after delivery, they're going to get hepatitis B.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this country, it's believed, they're hepatitis B, mom's hepatitis B positive, we'll give the immunoglobulin, we'll start the series of shots right away, which I read a new study that the data is not actually very good, that it's stopping the disease from happening, it's just driving it down, and then it pops up later in life.
Yeah,
so I think there's more to look at for that. But so someone kind of stood up and said, so they just started giving it to all the babies in these other countries where it's endemic. And someone kind of stood up and said, well, if it's good enough for third world countries, it's good enough for us. We should be doing this. I'm sure Big Pharma convinced somebody with, $300,000 or something that this was a good idea.
But I mean, they do have a point that if it were really preventing it in third world countries, then it would have to be looked at. But the question is it preventing it in any third world countries even? And
that's the question, and I don't have the data on that. And now that I've read this study that's that came out recently that happened here, I question that it's working because they don't even have the organized medicine to follow up that kind of information in a third world country. They also don't have the organized medicine to know what mom's Hep B status is at delivery. In this country, if you have prenatal care, they did a hepatitis B status on you in the first trimester, and they did it again in the third trimester or when you showed up to deliver, and they know you're negative.
Okay.
And so there is no risk unless you think your newborn's going to have sex or do heroin or something in the parking lot on the way home.
Right.
So, but what people don't realize is hospitals are a well-oiled machine, right? So there's this thing called eyes and thighs. Baby comes out, hits the warmer, they do a weight, they do a length, and they do eyes and thighs. They put erythromycin antibiotic ointment in the eyes, which is a whole other subject we could talk about.
Right, yes.
They do vitamin K shot in one thigh, which is a whole other subject we could talk about, and they do hepatitis B in the other. And so a lot of times they have these, quote, order sets that are all set up and ready to go for that baby to be born, and they can pull those meds out of the medication dispensing system and have them drawn up and ready to go. So it's baby's born, bam, bam, bam. I have a big problem with this because I think we have basically an entire society of people that have no clue about body integrity because they're attacked the moment that they are born.
Yes.
But that's what they do, and they'll put that consent in the pile of consent forms that you're signing. And so if you're, you get your brain kind of goes to mush, and you just keep signing like, oh my God.
Well, people are used to signing terms of service agreements that they never read because you'd spend your whole life reading them. Right?
Exactly, and so they're signing on autopilot, or if you come in, you're signing when you get there and you're already in labor, you don't know what's going on, and so you literally have to walk into the hospital and be like, hey, my kid's not getting hepatitis B, my kid's not getting vitamin K, if that's what your choice is, my kid's not getting eye ointment, that's what your choice is. Hospitals love to make fun of people with birthing plans, but I tell you what, when you walk in with it and you're like, here you go, I expect everybody to read this, put it at the front of my chart, when my baby's born, hand me my baby, don't touch my baby.
Right.
You kind of have to walk in like that, and then everybody's paying attention. But if you walk in and you don't know what's going on and everything's hunky, you're just going with the flow and what they do, your kid's going to get it. And now you have a kid, a newborn, that's being injected with a very, very large amount of aluminum, like 12 hours within 12 hours of being born, and it's just not okay.
And the semantics, again, are a huge weapon in the whole thing psychologically, because calling a shot a vitamin K shot is like calling a mercury tooth filling a silver filling. Right. It's got a little bit of silver in it along with the other metals and the mercury. And the vitamin K shot probably does have a little bit of vitamin K, but
it's got a lot of vitamin K, like 2,000 times the dose they need.
Yeah, and first of all, why would babies be born in nature deficient in an essential vitamin?
That's always my thing. Is you look at it and you go, okay, do we really think that, however you look at it, God messed it up or nature messed it up, that we accidentally made all the kids vitamin K deficient? Just like I go, human males are the only species born in the United States with a surgical emergency, and we got to get that foreskin off of there right away because Lord have mercy if that stays.
Yeah, that's why everybody used to die in the pre-science age. Right.
Yes.
Yeah, no, the idea is the given is that science is way more advanced than nature. And in the pre-science days, I remember, I'm a couple of generations older, but I was taught in elementary school in the 50s that before 1950, it was all superstition and everybody died, and it was amazing if anyone survived anything. And now we have modern science and 3-stage rockets, and so everything's fine. And that's kind of the basic, first step in thinking about anything is that modern science is saving the world from nature.
Well, and we live in a very high-tech society, and high-tech society doesn't like low-tech. Not touching the baby is low-tech. Breastfeeding low tech. They
Yeah.
don't like that. There's got to there's got to be more to do and things to look at and to fix and prevent, and they don't like low tech. They want everything high tech. So hepatitis B is, they're going to give that at birth,
Right.
and then they'll tend to give it again at the first or second month well check, and then they'll give it again, 6 months or after. And so that right there for, a blood-borne pathogen, a sexually transmitted disease, that's a 3-dose series right there that's very high in aluminum. Mm-hmm. And so then, once they're 2 months, they come in, 2 months and 4 months, they get pummeled with the rotavirus, the DTaP, Hib, which is a meningitis, Prevnar, which is the pneumococcal, and polio. So when you look at how many diseases that is, it's rotavirus, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, Hib, pneumococcal, and polio. So you're looking at 7 diseases, but a lot of those vaccines have more than one strain in them. So the Prevnar, the pneumococcal, now has 13 strains in it, all by itself.
Wow.
So if you start adding the strains up, I mean, the number of diseases you're exposing your child to at once really become astronomical. And I don't have the total number off the top of my head. It's blown my brain right now, but it's quite a few. If you're looking at 13 just for the pneumococcal, and then you add all of the other 6 diseases on top of that, you're looking at just quite an insult that's happening at 2 or 4 months. And
It's
so,
amazing any babies survive all that stuff.
right. I mean, what I'm seeing a lot of is really bad eczema starting after the 2 or 4 month shots.
Mm-hmm.
And eczema is one of those, like when you're saying about seizures being normal, eczema has kind of been normalized. Oh, it's just a thing. It happens. We don't know why. Slather this steroid cream on it. They'll grow out of it. It happens to a lot of kids.
Yeah, exactly. Which, if the person is very authoritative and condescending and has the right uniform on, it's hard to ignore. If you've got this built-in reverence for authority figures, you think, how could they, 500 years of school, they can't be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I mean, when you're talking about by the time they get to kindergarten and they're getting their boosters, they're having three doses of hepatitis B, 2 doses of rotavirus, 5 doses of DTaP, 4 doses of the Hib, the meningococcal, 4 doses of the pneumococcal, 4 doses of polio, 2 doses of MMR, 2 doses of chickenpox, and 2 doses of hepatitis A.
Right.
And that doesn't even include the kids that are getting the flu shot. You can add those. And the first time they get the flu shot, they can start them at 6 months. They give them 2 doses that first season. And then they'll get 1 dose the next season. So you can add 3 doses. You can add 2, 3, 4, 5. You can add between 4 and 6 doses of that on top of all of that by the time they're going to kindergarten.
Okay, and it's not just the number of pathogens that are in this that are either weakened or live. It's a whole bunch of other things too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
that's what I was.
You started talking about the eggs. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the ingredient lists are available on the CDC website, except you said you had to look up excipients separately, right?
You have to look up excipients separately. I call that an advanced move. Like if you haven't looked at anything, if you'll just Google CDC PDF vaccine ingredients, you will get the actual, it'll take you right to that link. Otherwise, if you just go to the CDC and start clicking around, they make it very roundabout to find it.
Okay.
Likely on purpose, because most people fall out of their chair when they read the ingredient list.
Yeah, and nobody mentioned any of this to me when I was signing up for the shots. Okay, so the idea of putting all these things into the baby and the kid and even the adult later, if they can catch them, is that it makes the body create what they call antibodies. But do they actually have any idea what that really means? What is the whole thing of the appearance? Because you can put aluminum into the blood and you get antibodies. So what does that actually mean? Because that's the basis of the whole argument, really.
There's two things I like to talk about with antibodies, and one is they like to say that if you have an appropriate antibody response on blood draw, that you're sufficiently vaccinated, meaning immune. But when
what's
you really
what's an appropriate response? I don't want to get you off.
Well, just saying, they're saying here on the blood work, here's your titer, and it has to be above this number to say that you have a high enough antibody to say that you have immunity.
Okay, so there's just a certain number of antibodies that are supposed to be in the blood to mean that you're immune.
To mean that you're immune, but when you look at the studies, there are people that have positive antibodies from vaccines, and they've had showing that, okay, well, you must be immune. They get the disease anyways. And then there are people that didn't ever have antibodies show up in the bloodstream that have been exposed and never get the disease.
Yeah, that's
so it's not even
issue, right?
It's not even, and it's interesting. I think there are more doctors out there that realize that want to admit it, because I was a young nurse, and I had very large reactions to the hepatitis B series for college, and I had a full-blown autoimmune disease after that with fulminant yeast overgrowth. They grow hepatitis B in yeast. I had the thrombocytopenia. I mean, I had all sorts of things going on, and then my titers were all negative, and so the hospital's like, you need to get revaccinated, and I said, oh, hell no. No. And I remember, and they bullied me, and I just said, no, not happening. So I'm just going to leave because you guys are just sitting here bullying me. What do they do? They reach in their desk and they pull out a declination form that OSHA makes specifically for that. You guys are jerks. You're jerks. And they're just looking at me like, I was probably the most terrible person they felt like they had ever dealt with, because I was furious at that point. But I remember saying something to like a primary care physician, and he said about how they were going on and on about it and really giving me a hard time. And he said, nobody's ever even been able to prove that antibodies give you immunity anyways. And I always think about him because he was just some random doctor. And I'm like, how many doctors actually know that? And just, it's just easier for them to ignore that fact. I don't know.
That's very rare that anybody would say something like that.
And that was years ago. And only because I have a memory like an elephant do I remember that. But, that's what I always talk about is people get hung up on these titers, and sometimes parents do that as well. They want to get their child's blood drawn and say, oh, well, if they already have the antibodies, I won't get them their boosters. Well, if there was data showing that was accurate, that might be a nice way to go, but nobody's been able to prove that's accurate. So do we really need to poke this 4-year-old?
Yeah. So this little point that you brought up, that there's no correlation between antibodies and immunity, is a pretty big deal. Right? Because the whole reason for the giving all the shots is that it seems to produce more antibodies.
Yes. And I have talked to healthcare workers. One's a physician, one's a respiratory therapist, talked to several that have been re-inoculated and re-inoculated and re-inoculated by their employer over and over again because their titers never came up positive. And then they started getting sick and having all these issues, and I'm like, it doesn't even mean anything. And and obviously you're never going to convert. But, to them it's just saline and the bugs, so they just keep doing it. I don't know. Yeah,
exactly. And so, well, I mean, if that one issue were understood, that there's no correlation between antibodies and immunity, that's also the justification for using aluminum and mercury and all the other not excipients, but adjuvants that they put in. But if that's an irrelevant issue, then that's a highly questionable practice.
They just don't. This one physician, man, she just didn't know she didn't know. She told me, she's like, I literally knew nothing about the entire thing. I was just going with it. And she doesn't even live in this country anymore. She left. She's like, peace out. I don't even want to. My husband got a job offer somewhere else. We're leaving. She's not practicing medicine. I mean, it's hard to spend that kind of time and money to do something that you've always wanted to do and realize that there's so many things going on that just are downright evil, I guess.
Yeah.
And so, but the other thing I like to talk about antibodies is that what you have to realize is they purposefully add aluminum to things to make your body pay attention to them so that you will make antibodies.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't correlate that to when you have a group of scientists that are studying food allergies, they actually take those food proteins and attach aluminum to them and then inject them into mice
Mm-hmm.
to make them allergic to that food or anaphylactic or whatever. And that's how they create the model that they're using to study.
Yeah, you really need to go over that step by step so people follow what you're saying is really important.
Right. So when you have, we have lots of food allergies in the country, and so scientists are always, they're, inherently trying to do good things. They're trying to figure out how are we going to manage or treat or cure. That's rarely the case, but how are we going to manage these people that have these food allergies? And so what they do in the lab is they take a food protein, say they're going to study dairy. They take casein protein and they attach aluminum to it and they inject it into mice.
Yeah, because they need a mouse that's allergic to dairy, right?
They need a mouse allergic to dairy so that they then can go, okay, what are we going to do about this? Because, of course, they come up with theories of treatments and what they can do, and they just start testing on them, right? Because we're not going to test on humans, so they use mice. That's a really big deal that they know that that's how they do it and that they've come up with a system of injection so that a very large percentage of their mouse herd becomes allergic to dairy so that they can then figure out how to treat that.
Right.
Knowing that you're vaccinating your infant every 2 to 3 months while they're growing up with vaccines that all have aluminum in them and all have different proteins in them. Chicken, beef, dairy, peanut oil as on the excipient list is there, all of those things. And so everybody's walking around going, I just don't understand how all these kids have food allergies now. And I'm going, well, the scientists can tell you because they're using the exact same model to make allergic mice so they can figure out how to treat your kids.
Oh.
And what a lot of people don't realize is DTaP, the whooping cough vaccine, is grown on dairy. And that, to me, from the pattern I see, tends to be the biggest eczema maker. Most kids that are colicky are reacting to dairy. Kids that are rashy, 95% of the time, dairy is the biggest culprit. And, they 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, they're hitting them with the whooping cough that's full of aluminum and grown on dairy.
Wow.
And it took me a long time to find that information. I wish I would have saved it to my computer. It might even be in there. I don't know, with the whole other piles of stuff that I have.
Yeah.
But it did take me a long time to find that information.
So they're connecting the aluminum with the dairy protein, injecting it into the babies, and that's exactly the procedure you do to create a dairy allergic mouse.
Yes. So it's not I guarantee you, if you have a pediatric practice, that's a very large pediatric practice, they've seen a kid, they probably didn't put it together, but they've seen a kid that went in for a round of shots and then within that next week, had a glass of milk or a bowl of ice cream or something and, ended up in the ER either with severe hives or an EpiPen or something like that. And now the kid's extremely allergic to dairy. And I'm like, you guys really need to start paying attention to patterns.
Yeah, that used to be understood as the whole basis of science. is observation of patterns, and then you're supposed to come up with a theory of why that's happening and then test it. Right? But now it's instead it's let's see, true.
Now it's all true, unrelated.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. So science has really changed.
Yes, it has.
So is it possible if parents do their own homework and they determine that not only do vaccines not prevent any of these diseases, but they cause all kinds of diseases instead, is there a safe way for them to have babies in hospitals, and is it a good idea? I mean, let's just assume we could look right through it and tell the truth and about what's really going on. Is that a wise move? I mean, I'm sure I'm going to get...
I think you can, but you need to know, when I explained about, the machine that it is, you need to realize they do the exact same thing every single time. And so you have to know exactly what it is you want and exactly what it is you don't want, and you have to come in guns blazing. Like, you're going to walk in the door and they're going to be like, oh, crap, you're one of those. I mean, that's what you have to be.
It's just like when you don't want to walk through the X-ray machine for TSA.
Exactly.
They have to stop the whole line and say, we've got another one.
Uh-huh. Oh, I tell you what, the best thing I ever did was have a baby, and I just strap her to me in the carrier, and then they have to leave me completely alone. Like that.
Oh, really? Wow, that's interesting.
This is how I don't get groped every time I fly. Fantastic.
Wow, I never heard that before.
Yes, I just put her in the carrier, and because I refused to go through the scanner, and so they just send me through the metal detector and swipe my hands for explosives, and off I go.
To use that technique, you're going to have to do a lot of weightlifting, so you can do that with her when she's 15 and stuff like that.
I know, right? But like, she can't walk. I mean, I'm not kidding. Like, it's been the easiest thing for me, but I think you just have to know. It's like when I see a newborn, I'm like, okay, did we get vitamin K and eye ointment at birth? And they're like, I don't think so. And I'm like, okay, hold on. Did you walk in or really obnoxiously and tell them that you didn't want it done? They're like, no. I'm like, then they got it. And they're like, they did? I mean, they literally have no clue that all that's going on. You have to be very educated about what their process is. And so, of course, for someone like me, it's a lot easier because I am a nurse practitioner. I know how it works. I'm very mean if I have to be. And so, and I delivered somewhere I had privileges with Julia, and so they already knew how I was to begin with. They knew where I had left to go work at instead. So they kind of knew, but it did get to the point where someone tentatively walked in and said, Did you want the hearing screen? I'm like, yeah, I think I want to know if my kid's deaf. That's pretty non-invasive.
Okay, right.
They literally can't even draw the line between like what my actual thought process was for everything.
Yeah, because you're obviously against everything modern and scientific and reasonable.
Exactly. Yeah, like they literally couldn't figure out. They couldn't draw a line anywhere.
Okay, so what's this thing that you mentioned that they do to the baby's eyes? Why don't you explain to people what that is? And, of course, the eyes aren't connected to the rest of the body, so it's totally safe, whatever's in it.
Exactly right. There's no way there can be systemic involvement, right?
Yeah.
So basically years ago, before we had nice IV antibiotics and organized medicine, a follow-up system, if you had a baby vaginally and you had chlamydia or gonorrhea or whatever, and you went home and you didn't get treated and then you didn't get followed up, you would go blind. Pretty big deal, right?
You mean the baby would?
The baby would go blind.
Yeah.
Because they would get chlamydia or gonorrhea or whatever it was in their eyes, and it would fester there, and it would make the baby go blind. I get it. I don't discount. That's a very big deal. And so back then they started using silver nitrate in the eyes, which cut down on the infection, but it burned eyes, and it made them very red, and then the babies and the mom couldn't bond because the baby couldn't see, and for a while after the treatment. And so, then they came out with doing the eye ointment. And so every single baby that's born gets the eye ointment. The issue with that is, if it's a C-section birth, which 1 in 3 deliveries in the United States are C-section births, they didn't come in contact with the vagina, they don't need eye ointment. 2, if you had prenatal care, they swabbed you to make sure you didn't have chlamydia or gonorrhea or anything else growing down there. And if you didn't, your baby doesn't need eye ointment in his eyes. And the nice thing is that if you had prenatal care, really nice prenatal care, it's probably pretty assumed that you're going to have pediatric care and be seen after discharge in the hospital and call if your kid's eyes are red or crusting or whatever they're doing, and then you can get treated and you don't go blind.
Right. Now, even if you did have that infection and that, microorganisms going on in the body, why wouldn't they use something that has zero negative effects and still gets rid of the unwanted bacteria such as, say, nanosilver?
Silver or iodine even would be a good choice, because silver they're not going to use. That's a whole other subject. Okay. Iodine would be actually a really good thought, but nobody can make money off of that.
Okay, you just use it
iodine costs
super
like
dilute.
a cent a drop. Yes.
Yeah, very dilute, and if it's dilute enough, it has absolutely no negative effects, right?
Right. Yes.
Okay, so, I mean, they do have options like that. It's just, like you said, nobody's going to do that.
Right.
And there's two...
Hospitals are machines. Oh, we've been doing it this way for years. We're just going to keep doing it.
Right. So
and the rest of you are crazy.
What happens for the people that have babies at home with a midwife?
It probably depends on the midwife and the part of the country you're in and stuff, because there are plenty of midwives that aren't giving the eye ointment, and there are some states where it's actually state law to give the eye ointment, which why there are any state laws dealing with healthcare, I don't know. I'm sure some legislators stood up and said, "Oh, the poor babies are going blind," and patted themselves on the back for getting some legislation passed, and it looked good to their constituents and everything. And so, in the state of Texas, we actually had a law that said eye ointment is to be given to all the babies, and if it's not, the provider could be either given jail time or fined.
Wow.
A good chunk of money. And so what started happening was people started saying, yeah, this is my fifth kid. I've been married to the same man. We're not doing eye ointment. I don't have chlamydia. I don't have gonorrhea. Or I had a C-section. We're not doing it. Well, the doctors started calling CPS because they're pansies.
Wow.
And they were afraid that somehow somebody was going to know. How anyone would know is beyond me, that someone was going to know and they were going to get fined or go to jail. I'm sorry, the whole thing cracks me up. And so we were trying to get a bill through last legislative session, just get rid of the bill altogether, and they didn't really go for that. And so we actually did an amendment decriminalizing the providers if it wasn't given. So it literally says in the bill they are no longer held responsible. All you have to do is chart it in the chart that the parents declined, and that's it. And so that goes into effect September 1st. And so we're hoping to, I have been pushing that and have been helping with that in the last legislative session. I was actually going to go down and testify, but then it was going so well, we thought it might actually draw too much attention to the issue if I showed up. So we decided not to, but, it's just ridiculous, the things you have to go through to get to make healthcare decisions for your own kid.
It is. Now, when you say we got that done, are you talking about Nurses Against Mandatory Vaccines, or is this?
No, it's just a group of moms.
Okay, good.
It's just a group of moms. That's it.
Good. So, kind of keeping an informal communication chain going, or how are you mostly working nowadays on that?
You cut out for a second, so I didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm saying the group NAMV was very, specifically organized. Are you using more of a loose kind of chain of communication between interested parents now, or how are you working on issues like this?
Well, Nurses Against Mandatory Vaccines, we started with the sole purpose to deal with vaccine requirements for healthcare workers to keep their jobs. Mm-hmm. So that's really what we focus on, and really we're just using social media right now. Nurses are pretty annoying in that they complain and complain and complain and complain, but they don't actually want to do anything because they're all afraid to lose their jobs. Whereas if they would all have just stood up and said, nope, the whole thing would have died in the water anyways because there's already a nursing shortage. So we're doing that, but then, the president and then myself and the other board member, or the founding people, we came together, I guess, last year when Physicians for Informed Consent was forming. And, we said, well, I mean, are we going to stay? Because we've always just been adamant about not commenting on childhood vaccines, but then, of course, doing what I do for a living, when I did radio interviews, it would come up and I would answer. I would always preface it with, now we only deal with this, but here's my response to that personally. So we decided that we were going to start making, that part of our platform is that we do believe in, appropriate medical consent, and that where there's risk, there must be a choice. And so that for vaccines across the board, for any age, situation, profession, whatever it is that's going on, that everybody should have a choice. They shouldn't be mandatory. But, we're going to have to talk to each other and get ramped up for the flu season that's upon us shortly.
Right.
And see what we're going to do. But
you mean whether you're going to talk about it with respect to the general public that's not nurses, right? Whether you're going to take a position about that.
Right. Well, we've decided to take a position, knowing that what we really focus on is healthcare workers.
Okay.
And there's been some states that have tried to put up some bills to make it illegal for them to do that, or right now they're only offering medical exemptions, trying to require religious or conscientious exemptions, and so people are starting to mobilize. I think as time goes on and they're having to get the flu shot every year and they get sick every year, or they're having rheumatoid arthritis and joint pain, and they're realizing that it's not something that they can just continue to ignore for their own health. And so we're hoping that the nurses will be more willing to mobilize, but I can say this because I am one, they're a pretty frustrating group to deal with at times.
Because they're motivated by fear of losing their job and ridicule and things like that?
Okay. Yes.
So in a way, it comes down not just to a scientific information issue, it's a psychological issue. Yes. Because if you figured out a way to make them feel braver, they've already got the data, and they would be open to understanding it at that point. If they can't afford to really acknowledge the validity of what you're saying because they're scared, then what you need is an antidote to fear, it sounds like.
If you come up with one, let me know. I'm to the point where I've kind of had it. Nurses are the frontline workers, and we are supposed to be the patient advocates, and we are supposed to be standing up for those patients and looking out for those patients. Yeah. Most people don't realize, if a physician writes an order that's inaccurate or inappropriate, and the nurse follows through with it, it's the nurse that gets in trouble, not the doctor. Right. Nurses do not just blindly follow instructions, or they shouldn't, because they might get sanctioned or lose their job, because you're supposed to know whether that's an appropriate order or not before you before you go fulfill it. Mm-hmm. Like if your job is to stand up for patient rights and stand up for what is absolutely the best for their health, and you can't even stand up for yourself, that really makes it a scary situation for me to walk into a hospital and be cared for by you, because you apparently don't have any balls for yourself, so why are you going to have any for me? I've started to get pretty mean about it, because I truly don't understand. I don't understand.
Right, but what you really need, I mean, the meanness is just expressing frustration, but what you really need is, you need a cure. Mm-hmm. It's not something to be managed, right?
Right, and if you walk into a building full of people that have had their medical rights taken away from them, the entire building that's there, that's a slippery slope. So why are they going to feel like it's your right for you to walk into that building and be able to get informed consent and say yes or no or not? Why are they going to give that to you if they feel like they can't have it themselves?
No, they've already assumed that it's not practical. And what's the position on the whole thing of physicians for informed consent? What do they think about it?
Their position is basically is what it says is informed consent, is that it's the provider's job to give the pluses and the minuses of the different modes of treatment that are available, and you make the decision, yes or no. Do you want A, B, or C, or none?
Okay.
Based on that, I've given you true information from both sides of the issue, the good, the bad, the ugly, the choices, and you should be making that choice.
Okay, so there shouldn't be any mandatory health measures of any kind.
Correct.
Okay, and what are the plans of the power structure right now that wants mandatory everything? What are their plans to go after the adults?
Well, they have, the Healthy People 2020 has a goal of having so many or however many percentage of adults up to date on their vaccines by 2020. I don't know what's going to happen because they haven't pulled it off. It amazes me that people hand over their kids, but they don't want to roll up their sleeves.
Yeah, incredible.
But they haven't done it, and it's 2017 is going to be over soon, so I don't know how they're going to restructure that. One of the big things that we're looking at it, they rolled California over. California is dead in the water. Everything's mandated. Then they have even more horrible bills coming out taking away parental rights now that they were successful with the vaccines. Merck is moving to Austin, Texas.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
This just was announced within the last month, I would say, or less. And so we knew we would be the next battleground after California turned over, because it really was always California and Texas were the don't mess with us. We're not vaccinating if we don't want to, and don't tell us what to do kind of people. And so we always knew they were coming for us. They did come for us this last legislative session again, and they were not successful. And so we don't think it's coincidence, air quotes, that Merck's moving to Austin.
It's like moving a regiment in military action or something like that.
And they're going to infiltrate the city with a bunch of people that work for Merck who think vaccines are awesome.
Right, and Austin is already leaning in that direction anyway. It's like a UN Agenda 21 focal city. And,
exactly.
So, interesting. Okay, well, I want to talk to you when we're done here on the fear issue, because it sounds like if you had, let's just say you had a no side effect or only positive side effect medicine, a real medicine, not a toxic drug that cured fear, not managed it, but cured it. And what you could do with that to get the nurses behind you might be valuable. And I've got some ideas for that we'll talk about. But since we're just about to wrap up here, let's say with all this massive amounts of information that we've made available that hopefully people will listen to frequently by replaying the archive of this discussion, what do you think is the main, critical point that you'd like people to remember after the whole thing when they go home and move on to the next thing they have to do with their kids?
I think that the main point is don't just do things because people tell you they're, quote, due or it's time. If it involves injecting something into your child, you need to spend hours of your time looking into it. I think that the Truth About Vaccines miniseries was done in an amazing way. Yeah. I loved it. I bought it. I'm sharing it with all sorts of people. They love it. I think that if you really want to know all sides of the issues and everything that's gone on in the history and all the people that are involved, then you need to watch that.
Right. Now, what you said, you're sharing it with people. If they buy, this is a series put on by Ty Bollinger, who's done other good things like that. And it's a series of interviews with a whole bunch of people with all kinds of credentials and parents with experience that have had things happen with vaccines and what really went on. And you get the direct information right from the people involved. But you have, I think they give you different ways to buy it. You can get online files, or you can get DVDs, or both. And what is it that allows you, without breaking copyright rules and things, to be able to share? Is it the files you can send to people?
No, I purchased the actual DVD set.
Okay. So
like I think when it first came out, you could get 2 sets of everything, like the file, the download, plus the actual hard copies, plus the paper transcript. You could get all 2 sets of that for $200. So
okay.
I purchased it, and then one of my friends paid me $100, and I gave her the other set. And so I literally have like the actual DVDs that people are borrowing and taking home.
I'm just wondering, this is stuff that should be shared with a lot of people. So I was just looking for a way, if you want to share it with a couple hundred people, how do you do it? And I'm not sure. Because I don't,
they just last week, when it first came out, they aired each episode, there's 7, for free for 24 hours on the internet.
Yes.
They just did that again last week.
Okay.
So I would just really follow their Facebook page, and then, get their newsletter updates, go to their website, because they'll do it again. And, I tell people, if you have questions, if something just doesn't feel right, or I tell people, if you listen to me all the time and you think I'm full of crap, watch the first 2 episodes.
Yeah, okay.
You can watch the first 2 episodes. That will give you plenty of information to open your eyes about the whole issue.
Well, and let's say you mentioned listening to you all the time. What if they want to do that and stay up with what you're doing? Is there any way to, stay in touch with all that?
Well, I have a website called notwesternmedicine.com that got seriously hacked after I gave my speech at the Children's March for Humanity in Washington, D.C. this summer, and it is not back up yet. I really wish that it was, but I had to have them wipe it completely clean. So I'm working on getting that back up with the best security that we can get, because as you said on the phone, clearly I got the government stamp of approval.
Yeah, congratulations.
They were not happy about that.
Right. And you're still alive too, which is great.
Yeah, I'm still alive, so I'm mean enough to be alive, so that's helpful. But at some point I'm hoping for that to come up, and so I was waiting for the website to come up before I brought the Facebook page back up, but I probably just need to bring that up at least, so that people can kind of follow what's going on.
Is the address going to be the same? NotWesternMedicine.com?
Yeah.
It's still the same name.
Yes.
Okay. So people could just kind of watch for that and see when it comes back up.
Yes, that would be great.
All right. Well, thanks for the wonderful class. It was incredible, and I hope you'll come back at some point for an update and the next stage. There are a few other things to talk about, as you know, but this was great. So hold on, and we'll say goodbye in the break here. All right, there goes Michelle Rowton, incredibly inspiring person in my opinion, and just a reminder that we all have incredible ability to make positive change in the world and in ourselves, actually first, and then in the world. Everybody who, as Michelle explained, in the natural health field, almost all the people who have come to open their minds to exploring all these natural alternatives to the regular medical industry has gone through some kind of crisis in their own life, and they've learned by experiencing these problems on their own and having to solve them, and then gone out and realized that needs to be shared with the rest of the world. And a big part of it is bringing back common sense. Excuse me. We're trained that common sense is not scientific and that it's highly inferior to modern cutting-edge so-called science and information from the academic world. But common sense has always been an essential element in real science. And so we need to bring it back. And an example she just brought up during our discussion is about antibodies, the little things that appear in the blood after you put in poison of some kind, whether it's aluminum or viral material, other things like that. And it's just assumed in the vaccine idea that this makes you immune to diseases. And the only problem is that scientifically, in real science, there is no correlation between antibody presence and count and the number of the antibodies and immunity to diseases. People with very high counts of antibodies get the diseases, and people with no antibodies to speak of sometimes have great immunity. So they just don't correlate. And yet the whole theory of vaccination that is presented as the greatest advance in medicine in the last 200 years is based on the assumption that the presence of antibodies mean immunity, and it doesn't. And then they figure that that's going to be way beyond your ability to understand, and you'll never look into it. So you've got to break the worship of authority, do your own homework, recognize the psychological chains of fear and self-limitation that make you think that you can't understand what these people say. And yeah, if they use language that you've never heard before, excuse me, which the medical industry and others try to do so that they sound very brilliant and learned and make you think that you don't know anything, just translate, do the work, and find out what it is in simple terms, and then see if it makes any sense. So what you begin to realize is that the intellectual learning is important and useful and essential to understand the environment that you're working in and what all these people are saying. But consciousness and work with your mind is absolutely indispensable for full access and use to the material. Otherwise, you say, well, you understand it in theory, but just like Michelle was saying with the nurses that she wants to support her, many of them are, they may even understand, or they would understand if they let themselves, but they're too controlled by fear, which is just an example of the mind programs that get in the way. So that's one reason that we started, as you know, the Saturday show, which is a call-in show and discussion of consciousness and work with the mind that unlocks the potential of the real use of all this intellectual information that we're gathering. And on the Sunday show, of course, we try to have fantastic guests, either live or recorded, to fill in the gaps of the education that I really enjoy doing myself, and sharing with you is great. It puts me right in the middle of it. So I'm just voracious for learning anything useful that I can, and I hope that you feel similarly. And what you eventually find out from learning all these incredible things is that it's actually you who are the hidden secret to the healing of all the world situations. And you're supposed to think, oh, I couldn't possibly do any of that. I'm just one person. I don't know very much. I don't even have 10 PhDs or a Nobel Prize or anything. And all these experts know much more than I do. No, those are the experts that are trying to destroy the whole world right now with nuclear power and chemtrails and GMOs and deadly fake medicine that says antibodies cause immunity and a million other things like that we fall for. Those are the experts, okay? And look what they're doing. What's needed is you. Not you collectively, but I'm actually only talking to you out of the whole audience right now, and I'm serious. So the only way that you can unlock your ability to help the whole world is, it's okay to go work on projects and try to stop GMOs or whatever it is you're working on, but you really have to start with yourself. And if you do that, then the energy that you can put into whatever project you're working on is multiplied more than you can imagine. And the quality that you can put into that work, the effect that you have on other people, there's no comparison. So you have to do this work on yourself, and you have to learn what mind is, because it's dominating everybody's function. and it can become an incredible ally, but not just by intellectual learning. You have to do some very outside the box things, and I didn't want to talk about that for many years because I thought nobody would relate to it, but I think that's no longer true, and there are at least a tiny minority of people that have become open to learning things that they used to think were impossible. And so that's what we're going to go ahead and do, and just talk openly about all of it, and whoever can make use of it, that's great. That's what it's for. It's supposed to be a public service. And that work, if you do it, if you're brave enough and you take it on and accept it and apply it in your own life, it's going to make you a key asset to the healing of all the world problems right now. Even if nobody ever hears of you, you can be a massive advantage to humanity and put huge new energy and effectiveness into whatever your work is. And it only, one nice thing about it that I have to add is that it only works with positive projects. So what I'm talking about, you can learn about mind. You can use it at a very low level for doing things that are not good, but you hurt yourself if you do that. And the real potential of it is when you have benevolent intent, you want to help other people and the rest of the world, then this massive power is unlocked, and the global rulers can never match that, and they know it at the top level, and that's why they're trying to shut you down as fast as possible and keep you sick and weak and addicted to medical drugs and other drugs if possible, and believing all kinds of false things that you're hearing reinforced every day on the fake media, and not being in touch with your actual self, because if you are, then their game of destruction is quickly over. So if any of that's interesting to you, I'm inviting you personally to join us on Saturday, 6 o'clock Pacific, 9 o'clock Eastern, every Saturday. And that's our discussion and call-in show, and we're going to go into some of these really powerful outside-the-box things. So in the meantime, remember, visit our sites of lostartsradio.com, lostartsresearchinstitute.org, the forum on the Lost Arts Radio site for discussion, the new Facebook group that was started that needs people to come and discover it, the newsletter that has information about upcoming shows, and other things that I think are important to share with you. Nobody listens to us on YouTube very much. They mostly go to Blog Talk. So we need some YouTube listens when you get a chance, and maybe some likes over there if you like the content. That will help us with YouTube. And YouTube has already taken down one of our videos and has given us a warning. So I guess we got that government seal of approval. Trying to catch up to Michelle on that. And if you have money, resources, and you want to help us keep our work going, please donate. We've got donate buttons on both sites, but not if you're struggling to survive. I'm just meaning if you have some resources for that and you like our work, it would really be nice, because we do this without any connection to money. We're trying to change that in some ways that won't negatively affect it, but for the moment, anything that would get us to keep going and eventually toward building the major physical facility of a school that we want to do would be very much appreciated. And comments and ideas, share them on Facebook or the forum on lostartsradio.com, or if you need to get a comment to me or a question, I read all of them on email at richard@lostartsradio.com. I like to know what you think, because this is only happening, this show, to try to help you, and I hope that it is. And if we could do something better, or you got suggestions or questions, let me know. And come to the Saturday show if you get a chance, and that'll give you actual things that you can work on in everyday life that are pretty interesting. And that next Sunday we'll have another incredible educational show. I'll tell you about that if you're signed up for the newsletter, which you can on lostartsradio.com. You'll have some special notice about the shows coming up. So have a great week. Thanks for being here with our show with Michelle, and we'll see you next time.
Listen to our new shows with guests every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. All new shows and archives are available at blogtalkradio.com/Lost Arts Radio. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ Lost Arts Radio. We're on Twitter at Lost Arts Radio. Our YouTube channel is youtube.com/C/Lost Arts Radio. Again, youtube.com/C/Lost Arts Radio. And scene.life, we're at Lost Arts Radio /profile. When you do your Amazon shopping, please use Amazon's Smile program at smile.amazon.com. And when you choose Lost Arts Research Institute in Sedona, Arizona as your charity, Amazon will donate 0.5% of whatever your order total is to Lost Arts Research Institute to help fund the building of the school and keep our radio show on the air. Please visit lostartsresearchinstitute.org for more information on the school we want to build. Be sure to sign up for our free weekly newsletter on our site under the Radio Show tab or right from the button on our Facebook page. You're also invited to join our free user forum on our website at lostartsradio.com. You can ask Richard a question there or post about any subject that you're interested in. Our forum is growing and we'd love to have you be part of that community. We keep it troll-free, so don't worry about others, paid or otherwise, speaking negatively or engaging in some sort of debunking tactic fakery. I closely monitor the forum for abuse, and we have a very strict one strike and you're out policy, which is why we require you to register your email address along with whatever screen name or username you want to use. We also have links to all of the great independent musicians whose music we feature each week on Lost Arts Radio. And if you like Lost Arts Radio, please consider donating a few bucks to help keep us on the air. We spend many, many hours each week to bring you the best show we can with the best guests around. You can find our donate button on our website at lostartsradio.com. Contact Richard at richard@lostartsradio.com or myself, Doug Diamond, at doug@lostartsradio.com. Thanks again for listening to Lost Arts Radio, and we'll see you again next week.